Why do I have to wear this stupid ass helmet?
Yeah.
Alright guys, so the next part is the timing belt. Yes, I know it sounds scary, doesn't it? We're gonna start by setting this engine at top dead center. And with that, I have I've removed the spark plug hole for cylinder number 1, and I placed a long extension inside. What I'm gonna do now is rotate the engine until cylinder 1 is at top dead center. And if you do have your spark plug still installed, you are gonna have quite a bit of resistance, so don't worry. Also, before making any adjustments, before rotating your crankshaft, your pistons are gonna go up and down. Make sure your cams are at rest. What that does is it prevents your valves from being in the open position, and as you're rotating your crankshaft trying to locate top dead center for cylinder number 1, you'll prevent your pistons from hitting your valves. So in our situation, we're okay because all of our valves are closed. When I know it's at top dead center is when this extension reaches all the way out. And if you see that it slowly starts going downward, that means you've slightly passed it. So you want to go back just a little bit. The other thing is you want this cog right here with a dot to kind of lined up with this mark on your oil pump. And none of these marks are all perfect, like the ones for the rear of the timing covers. They're all just to give you a general idea of where where everything needs to be. So now that cylinder 1 is at top dead center, both of my cogs are right here. I need these to be facing upward, matching these. So what I'm gonna do is, you need to grab onto these very well because they will kick back in either direction. So I'm holding it with both hands. Same thing goes for this one. And you see, it snaps shut. Alright. The next thing you want to do is, if you have a brand new timing belt or an OEM timing belt, you should have your marks of where these marks are going to line up with these lines. And you should also have an arrow telling you which way is forward, so that arrow goes towards you. I'm going to start with lining up these. Well, you want to make sure that line is sitting in where the grooves are at. So like for us, we got our line right there. I mean, the line we wrote it with a metal marker. That's not an OEM line. So yeah, I've wrapped these with electrical tape so they don't damage the belt. I mean, if you're concerned with damaging the belt, you can also not over tighten it. So now we don't have to worry about our belt jumping off. Another thing you can do is use some of these clamps, and they can hold down on that as well. So now that you've got the driver's side done, what I like to do is, if it doesn't line up, or if you have too much slack in the belt, you can, while you're holding on to the sprocket, you can apply tension on the belt and rotate it, and it'll get rid of that slack in your belt. And then you can apply, you know, some pliers or whatever you have available. And then we'll jump over to the exhaust side. See, we're not quite lining up right there. We're about a tooth off. So you can set it where it needs to be, apply tension on your belt, and then rotate the gear. And then it got rid of that slack. And then what I like to do for this exhaust side, I like to place my clamp below. So for the crankshaft sprocket, what I like to do is you can see where it needs to be, and then you can see the line on the belt. So what I do is I just go counterclockwise a little bit. Make sure it's sitting on the line where it needs to be. I wedge something between the belt and the oil pump. And then in order to get rid of all this slack, I go clockwise. Hang on. You need to hold this end as well. It'll help apply tension to this. So there. A 10mm bolt. And only give it a few rotations at a time. If you try to tighten it too fast, you will snap this ear off, and then you'll have to buy a whole replacement. So just give it a few rotations at a time, slowly. And you know, with something as critical as your timing belt, you want to have patience. You can see the gap is already starting to close. So now that you've closed that up, you can go ahead and, before you mount it up, you can grab a bolt. And this is a little tricky. So with my right hand, I'm holding onto the belt. The left hand, I'm gonna place the tensioner in place. And once you've got it where it kind of needs to be, just install one bolt to keep it in place. But yeah, we've got our tensioner in place already. I'm still keeping tension because if I let it go, this lower part might fall off. So once you've got your tensioner where bolted down, you can go ahead and take off everything, keeping the belt in place. This is very, very critical. So a lot of people forget to take this bolt back out. And believe it or not, with this engine, when my friend bought it used, it still had the bolt in here. Luckily for us, it didn't fall out. Normally when this bolt falls out, it lands right here and it will destroy your timing belt. The other thing too is the factory service manual calls for a 4mm gap. So once you take this bolt out, I'm gonna go ahead and leave it in there for the time being. Make sure all of my lines mark up. My marks are lined up. Okay, and give it 2 full rotations, and then you check your gap. So yeah, you can see ours is still a little bit big. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is just go back and tighten this bolt back up, close the tensioner gap, loosen these 3 bolts, and apply a little bit more tension. You don't want this to be too tight or too loose. Too tight, you'll wear out your pulleys. Too loose, you can risk jumping a tooth. Our gap is too small, so we're gonna go back and try it again until we get it right. If you get this gap perfect every time, I mean, feel free to leave a comment below of your method of doing it. But I always find myself having to go back and forth just to make absolute sure that it's right. You can use a feeler gauge, feeler gauges, and come up with 4mm. You can also get a small socket, 4mm socket, and just kind of eyeball it if you don't have a feeler gauge. You know what that gap looks like and compare it with your gap. And you want to give it 2 full rotations. And after 2 full rotations, it looks like we have 4mm of clearance. So that's how I do my timing belts.